Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. You guys are all here for tips and tricks for developing and debugging apps. My name is Kelly Hutchins. I'm here with my colleague Heather Gonzago. We both work on the JavaScript team. In this session, we're going to talk about a lot of different things. So in general, we just put together a bunch of tips and tricks that we find useful when we're developing apps, things that we wish we'd known when we first started working with JavaScript API. We also sent out an internal message and asked the other developers on our team what tips or what's your one thing that you think we should tell people. So we've kind of got a collection of things that we use and some other tips that we got from developers on things that they thought would be really useful. So some of it might be sort of intro JavaScript level, and some is more in the weeds level. So hopefully there's at least something new you'll learn today if you're here, whether you're experienced or beginning in JavaScript. So the first thing we're going to talk about is local web server. A lot of times, one of the common questions we see on GeoNet, and we actually get through support, is that people go to our sample site, and the sample works online in the help. But then when they click download and try and run it locally, it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because they download the file, and in the file system, they just double-click on the file and open it up in the browser. And then if you look at the URL bar, it's the file protocol. So it'll say file : --. Sometimes your app will work. Sometimes it needs to make requests and stuff, and it just won't work over file protocol. So then people say, the sample's broken locally. I don't know what to do. The solution for that is setting up a web server. So if you're on Windows, IIS, or if you're on Mac, something like Apache. But there are a lot of cases where maybe you can't easily do that. You need a network administrator to do that, or it's just more trouble than it seems like it's worth. So to get around that, you can set up something called a local web server. There are lots of different options available. There are tools that are node-based, like HTTP Server and Express. So let's just look at the help page for something like HTTP Server. It's pretty easy to install. You just have to install Node. And then you go to a command line and you type this line to install something called HTTP Server. And then it's got a bunch of options. You'll also type another line to start the server. And then you can just access your files over HTTP instead of file, and things will work. So that's a pretty easy option. There's also one called Express that's a pretty easy option. Actually, before I get too far into this, let me show you where all the slides and notes are for this. So everything we're going to demo to you and some details are in Heather's GitHub repository. Some presentations, 2018. So we have this dev debug tips folder. It's got our demos. It's got some readmes with all the information that we're going to present to you. So if you want to go back and look at things later, or you want some more information about setting up the local web server or some of the other things that we talk about, we put some notes and links there so you can find out more information. Because it's sort of, we're just going to throw a lot at you. So these things like HTTP Server and Express are pretty easy to set up. But I tend to use extensions a lot. And there's an extension available in Visual Studio Code, which is the development environment that I've been using for the last year or so. I really like it, called Live Server, that sort of does that for me. So it handles starting that server, opening my file, and getting things set up. I'm sure that other development environments like Sublime and Brackets and Atom all have similar extensions or similar capabilities. So here we're looking at a sample in Visual Studio Code. Let me open the right sample. I have this code, and I have the live server extension installed. And once I've installed it, all I need to do is hit this Go Live button. It's going to spin up that local server in the background and launch my app. And if you look, there's this 127.0.0.1. So it's got my local host and then the port, and it's running that app on this local web server, not on Apache. I use this a lot, even though I have Apache installed, because I just like the ease of being able to click that button and spin it up and have the app open up instead of having to go to the browser and type HTTP localhost, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's a really nice time saver. And then you can just, click dispose when you're ready to get rid of it, and the server stops. So how many people out here already use like a local web server? Oh, almost all of you. OK. Good. Another thing that we find useful is code assist. So if you come from a language like C#, you've probably gotten used to having code assist, and then you start working in JavaScript, and you're like, I've got to type everything, no more code assist. For a long time, we didn't have a great answer. Now you can get code assist working. If you're using TypeScript, how many people here are using TypeScript? Okay, quite a few too. So if you're using TypeScript, you just get the code assist. It comes from the typings. It just works. If you're using JavaScript, you can get code assist using the typings. There's one caveat. It doesn't work with the require AMD style. That messes it up. So what you would need to do is write JavaScript using something like Babel to compile your code back to ES5. So it sounds like a little bit of a pain, but there's some benefits to that. You can use the latest language features and take advantage of ES6 stuff like async await. You can use the import style instead of requiring your modules. So I think it's something to think about if you've been looking at if you've been wanting code assist. It's not too bad to set up, and we have a link in that repo. So I'll click and open this up that has information on how you can get IntelliSense working in your project. This example is in Visual Studio Code. It should work in other IDEs as well. So basically, you have to again have Node installed and run a few commands. I have the commands listed here that you need to run. I also have a sample project that's all set up and ready to go, so you can test it out. And then you install the ArcGIS TypeScript typings. That's what you get. That's where you get the code assist from. You have to set a few environment variables, and then you're good to go. So let's look at our code project really quickly. So here I have this project set up. It's again using that Babel to compile this back to ES6. So here I'm using that import, let. If I had a function, I'd be using arrow function. So I'm working with the latest JavaScript features and starting to learn and play around with that, which is nice. And then I also get code assist. So if I come here and type view.center, I can see that I can see what center requires, and I can look at all the information about it. So I think it's really useful. And then when I have a script set up to watch this file, and whenever I make changes, it compiles it back. And then if I come in here, I can see I have a JavaScript file that converts it back to that AMD require syntax. The JavaScript is going to look a little bit funky because it does its own theme, but it's JavaScript that works just fine. So if you're interested in code assist, that's one approach you might want to investigate. Another thing that I use all the time is something called Emmet. I tend to be a little bit lazy. I would rather not spend all day typing stuff that I have to type on a regular basis. So Emmet is built into Visual Studio Code, and Sublime and a lot of other environments also have support for it. It just lets you do things like, if you ever have to create a new HTML file, you have to remember the HTML, the doc type, the header, the body, all the tags in the right order and type them out. Or if you're using Emmet, you can just hit the exclamation point, tab, and it's going to stub all that out for you. So I'll show you a demo of how that works. It's available, like I mentioned, in a lot of different environments. Here's a plugin page, so you can see that you can get Emmet support pretty widely. It's pretty widely available. Is anybody out there already using Emmet syntax? Okay. So I have this sample app here. It's just got an empty index.html file. So all I have to do is come in here and hit exclamation point, and it shows me right away the Emmet abbreviation. So when I hit tab, it's going to stub all that out. I can tab through, and it's got a few placeholders. I can change the title to my test app. I can save that. Another one I use all the time is link : and you can see it's got a bunch of different options. Link : CSS. I tab that out, and it stubs out the link tag. So this isn't doing anything revolutionary. It can just save you from having to remember and type all this stuff that you use on a regular basis. I'll show you they have a cheat sheet, so the Emmet doc. And you can see that you can do a lot of things. So if you spend a lot of time writing HTML, it's worth learning a few of these shortcuts. I don't use them all, but there are a few that I use on a regular basis. So if you have to create a list, for example, instead of typing out all the HTML for an ordered list or unordered list and all the list items, you can just do something like UL greater than LI times 5, and it will stub out a list with 5 list items in it. You can get way more fancy, like you can have it fill out classes for you automatically. So if there's something that you do a lot, it might be worth coming and checking out the Emmet doc and seeing if there's a way, to make it a little bit simpler for you. Snippets are another shortcut that I use all the time. These are templates for code, again, that you commonly write. So I create a map probably almost every day, right? And instead of typing this out, you can just create a snippet, type a little one-word command, and it stubs that out in your application. You can easily generate them, again, for Visual Studio Code, Sublime, Atom. They have support for it. Writing the snippet can be a little bit of a pain. You have to escape all these characters, and it's a bit of a hassle. But thankfully, there are some options to simplify it. There's this tool called the Snippet Generator, which is useful if you work in multiple development environments. Like sometimes I occasionally still do things in Sublime Text if it's just something quick and dirty. So if I want to create a snippet and I want it to work in both Visual Studio Code and Sublime, I could just come in here and paste my code, give it a description, and this tool is going to spit out the code for those different environments, and then I can paste it in there. Heather also found a tool. What was it called, Heather?
Snippet Generator.
Snippet Generator. Let's see if we can find. For Visual Studio Code, that's an extension that lets you just like right-click and copy a section of code, and that makes a snippet for it. So I think if you search for Snippet Generator in Visual Studio Code, it'll bring it up.
Actually, I think Snippet Creator. There's a few of them. There's a couple. The one that I liked was, I think it was Snippet Creator. But
yeah, so I bet if you just search for snippets in the extension section of your whatever environment you're using, you'll probably find something that will help you create them. So let me show you a few snippet generators that I use. I have a bunch that I've created, actually. I have one that I just called JSAPI. I tab that, and it adds all the links to the CSS style sheet, the Dojo config, and the JavaScript API. It also has, it also has these placeholders in it that I added. So that because I work on the dev team, I sometimes have to switch between versions, so I can really quickly choose which version of the API, and it'll plug that in there. So that's a nice feature. I also have one that stubs out the view div for me, so that's the div where the map is going to be located. I have one called map that stubs out the map, and I have one called require that stubs out the require statement. And I have one for my full map CSS. So now I think this should show the map. And I haven't typed anything except for my little one-word commands. Oh, come on, what did I forget?
Debugging in the debugging session. So we're debugging in the debugging session.
I'm not going to go through and debug this. I probably just forgot one little bit. Of course, this worked yesterday just fine. Yeah, that should be okay, though. But that might be it. Let me just reload it and try. Nope, it's something... Oh, it's something with the live server being goofy. Let's try it the old-fashioned way. Yeah, I don't know. Something with the live server wasn't picking up. So there's my app. So that's the app. Because I build things like this to test things all the time, I just wanted to set up a lot of shortcuts. And I'm sure we all have code that we write on a regular basis. And maybe you have it saved in a text file, or maybe you just hand write it or copy it from a sample. Snippets are a great way to just save a little bit of time. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Heather, and she's going to talk a little bit about some JSAPI resources.
Okay, so anybody here familiar with our, it's the JSAPI Resources repo that we have out there on GitHub? If not, take note of it. It's definitely very useful. we host a bunch of different resources that we think would be helpful for you guys as developers. So if we take a look at the actual page, you'll see here that the main things that we host are, well, we've got our TypeScript definition files. So we're going to host those for each release that we have. We go and spin those up, and we put those up there for both 3x and 4x. So if you guys are TypeScript developers, or maybe you want to play around with the IntelliSense that Kelly just showed you, this is where you're going to go in and access those. There's instructions on how you're going to go in and install it. So if you go to, yeah, they're in the README. So in each of the folders, there'll be a README for the instructions on how to go in and actually get that set up. Okay. We also have frameworks provided to you as well. So for those of you who may be into working with React, Ember, Angular, and so forth, Renee handles all of this, and he puts these up here as well. So just a lot of really good, useful information on those. We also have, if you're working with any of our, the JS hint file. So the JS hint file, basically, if you're not familiar with that, it's a file that you can put on your web server, either maybe at your root level, which is basically what I do just to keep things easy, or at the project level. And it basically just enforces some coding standards for you as the developer. So we provided our JS hint file that our people on our development team use when we're working within the API. So if you took a look at it, it's just a basic text file. We have things like, whether or not we're going to enforce camel case. How do we want you to put your quotation marks? Do we want double quotes, single quotes? Just a bunch of different information. And again, it's really, you can go in here, add things to it, update it to your heart's content. But again, it's just provided as a resource, as a sample. You guys can go in, take a look, and just download it and put it within your web server. So like in my case, I just have a sites directory that I use for my testing, and I have it housed right here. All right. We also have some build tools as well. So for those of you who might be doing some custom builds like Bower, let's say you don't want to go in and maybe reference the entire main.c, the entire API that we have, so you don't need to have every single class. This is where the Bower, or this is where these custom builds come into play. You can go and pick and choose the ones that you need, and then go ahead, compile that up, host that out on your own server, and use that when accessed within your application. And then lastly, we have the OAuth callback as well, and that is for those of you who may be working with some secure resources. If you're working with the platform security model of OAuth, we have, if you work with the pop-up functionality, logging in with the named users, the callback HTML file, we provide one for you. You don't have to use it, but it just makes it easier. So that's given to you as well. And let's see. Okay, yeah, so in addition, we're primarily just going to be working on Chrome in these demos, but you don't have to. I mean, there's dev tools in pretty much every browser that you're going to be working, that you can work with. And browser extensions as well. So we've just gone in, I go in and I like to see what's out there and what's available, what I can put on my machine to make things a little bit easier. These are just a listing of some of the ones that we've used. So did you want to show the what font? Yeah. Okay. So I don't have that one on my machine, you do. So 5? Okay.
I'll just show the 3. I'll just show 3 of the extensions I commonly use. So I use something called what font. It's just a little tool that lets you click the button, and then as you hover over text on the page, it'll tell you what font that it's using. Sometimes I use this when I'm debugging a website if I expect a title or some text to be in a particular font and it's not. I can always open up the dev tools and look at the CSS and look at the cascading and see what's going on. But sometimes this is really easy just to click and hover and be like, oh, okay, I think I know what's going on, and then I can drill in and find out why the font that I'm expecting isn't being applied. Another one that I use is something called Site, I think is what it is. And it will basically just format code in the browser. So if I right-click and open code and just want to look at it in the browser view source, it just makes the font a little bit bigger. It's got some options you can set and formats it. Same thing for JSON. There's one called, is it JSON View? Yeah, JSON View that I use, where if I right-click, in this case, network request that has JSON response, open it up, and it formats that JSON in a way that's really easy to scroll through and read, instead of sometimes you just get like one big blob with no line separators. So those are three that I commonly use. The code site, it's called SIGHT site. Yeah, site.
Yeah. Yeah, these are just, like I said, just a few of them. The JavaScript, CSS code beautifier, you guys will see that when I open up some of my, the underlying source for the what I show within the browser. There's this autocomplete for GitHub, which I really like. It's not really us, specific for ArcGIS, but I just think it's kind of neat. You install it and you go into GitHub and you start typing whatever, and it just provides you basically everything that based on that keyword. So there's a lot of really good things out there. It's just kind of fun to play around and see what works and what may not. So let's get in and actually start breaking apart and messing up some applications here. So most of you have probably worked with breakpoints. Usually it's one of the very first things that you're going to go in. If you're working in the dev tools, in Chrome dev tools, there's a lot of different ways of accessing and using breakpoints. Probably the most simplistic way is to just go in there and, like what you see here in the slide, just clicking on somewhere within the panel on the left-hand side and telling it, hey, this is where I want my code to stop. Pause execution on this line of code when I run my application. You can set conditional breakpoints. So, based on a certain condition, I only want you to pause at this point. You can set breakpoints on event handling, DOM manipulation, things like that. We're not going to go into all of that. There's a lot of really good documentation out there based upon whatever developer tools that it is that you're actually working with. So just wanted to go ahead and I'm going to show you, I also have, I'm going to show you a little option here. It's called a debugger statement that you can actually put within your code. And it's very similar to if you just actually went in and just clicked within your dev tools and added a breakpoint manually. And then black boxing. So basically saying, hey, when you hit this, if you hit this script, don't worry about it. You don't need to step through it. I'm not concerned about that. So we're just going to black box that and put that off to the side. So we're going to go ahead. I'm going to take a quick look. This is the app that, let me rerun that again. So this is the app that's running the way it's supposed to. Okay, so this is Mount Vesuvius. And if I click on an area somewhere around here, I get a pop-up that shows me the, I have a DOM node in basically the map view within my pop-up window. All right, so that's the working app. Now if I go back in, I've got, let me rerun this and make sure I don't have anything set. Oh, I did, yeah. Set some in here. Let me do that again. Reset that. All right. I swear. Slow. I don't have any breakpoints in here. What's going on?
It's still running.
Yeah.
In the far right panel, there's a plugin that gives you a list of breakpoints.
No, yeah, well, thank you. There you go. I don't have any breakpoints. So yeah, you can see all the breakpoints as well. Thank you for bringing that up. It's just being slow. Sorry. Thanks, guys. So everybody's accessing the internet at exactly the same time. So it always works that way, right? So thank you for bringing that up, though, too. So you can see all of the breakpoints. If I did go in here and start clicking around, you will have all of those breakpoints listed here within the panel on the right-hand side. Okay, so thank you very much. So what we have is this same exact application. If I go ahead and click on it, nothing's happening. Nothing. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look. And this is the one thing about when you do demos, I was telling Kelly, when you do demos using the developer tools like this, it's kind of hard because the screen, you're trying to juggle the screen, and I want to make the font larger, but trying to see everything. So I hope you guys are able to at least see, from scrolling through, you can get what you need. So I would think, all right, well, maybe it has something to do with on the scene view on click. I don't know, maybe I'll put something in here. So I'm just gonna go ahead, add that breakpoint there. Rerun it. Anything? And if this is gonna continue to be this slow, I may just go on to the next one because I don't wanna waste as much time. Okay, so we're gonna go in here, and as soon as this loads up, come on. Come on. There we go. All right. Same thing. If I'm going to try it, I'm going to go click on this. Nothing. All right. So it's not even getting to that point. So if I went ahead and went up a little bit further up within my code, all right, I'm just going to start putting some breakpoints in here. What's going on? So let's just try making sure our map view is actually getting created the way it's supposed to, or not, yeah, the pop-up view. So what I said before is we have our scene view, that's the main view, the main map or the scene. And then within our pop-up, I have the map view. So I have a map view within that pop-up, and that's what this part is right here. So if I add a breakpoint, let's just add a breakpoint right there. And do this again. Oh my goodness, slow today. It should stop at some point on the breakpoint. Yes, okay. So we're gonna stop there. And take a quick look, and what you guys should be able to see, and this might be old hat for some of you, but if you hover over any of these variables, okay, you should see if it's already been instantiated. So we do have an active, we have a valid scene view, okay? I've got, do I have a valid pop-up map? No, I do not. Why do I not have a valid pop-up map? So if I take a look, I'm going to go further up in my code, make this a little bit larger. All right, so what's the difference there? Pop-up map, I have it's camel cased, whereas down here, it's not. All right, so I mean, it's a tiny little slip up, but it basically just, it renders your application useless, right? So that's just one way of doing it. Another thing I wanted to show you was if you went in, you can actually go, and this is the code that I used. So let's say, for example, you, I'm actually going backwards here, but I want to talk about this. Those JS hint files that we talked about earlier, you see that the green line, pop-up map is not defined. If I had that, if I did not have that JS hint file, then it wouldn't have caught that. So if I was a good developer and I was reading through this and I was looking at all of these warnings that would come up, I would have seen that, and it would have flagged it before I even got to the actual application running in the browser. So I'm going to add that debugger statement there, and then save that again. Try this. And you guys see here, it automatically stops on that. All right, so if you don't want to have to manually go in there and start messing with things, you can go in and just add that manually. If you wanted to say, go in here and start stepping through some stuff, you can do that, but then you might get into the weeds of the dojo.js file. We've got all the minified init files, so forth. You're probably not going to want to you're not going to want to have to go through all of that. So what you could do actually is you could just go in and black box that. So if you went to your settings, and on the left-hand side, under black boxing, you can actually go in and it's basically just add a pattern, and you tell it what it is. So when you hit this script, I want you to just put it off to the side. Don't worry about it. So you can do the same thing here for like dojo.js file and so forth. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of that just because we have a lot of demos that we want to show you, but it's something to keep in mind, especially, I know for me anyways, I'll be like, just click, 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 click. Come on, how many times do I have to step through this? And then you realize, all right, I can just black box and make it a little bit easier. All righty. Do I want to show anything? No, I think that was it on that one. Okay, so you want to take that over? Mobile?
Sure.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about mobile emulation. You know, most of us are building sites now that we want to be responsive and work across a wide variety of devices. Testing on a device, you know, sometimes takes a little bit of time. We've got to connect through USB or do some sort of remote debugging to actually test on a physical device. One quick and easy way to do some testing is to use the emulation tools in the browser. Now, I would never release a site to production only having tested it with the browser emulation tools, but I do use them all the time for quick and dirty testing. Like, I want to make sure that when I switch down to mobile that I've positioned something correctly, and I don't necessarily want to, you know, get out of my phone, connect to VPN to access my internal developer site or hook it up through my USB cable. So I just test it using the emulation tools. Pretty simple. In Chrome, you just open the dev tools and click this little toggle device toolbar. I installed Chrome, the latest update of Chrome yesterday, and ever since then, it just shows in this little corner. I have to figure out what's going on. Don't update in the middle, you know, Dev Summit week is a lesson I learned. But it has a list of various devices. You can edit it and add different devices. Again, this is not perfect, but it would, if this was behaving correctly, you could quickly see, oh, that, you know, pop-up that I want to dock at the bottom, is it docking? Or I want to move the legend into the button. Are my media queries set up correctly? Is it doing what I think it should do at various sizes? So I use this, you know, quite a bit just for quick testing. Another tool that is useful for quick testing, let me put this back because we can see, this is a sample that uses the locate button to find your position, and location requires the user to say that they're okay with telling the browser where they are. But often we're developers and we might be building an app, we might be based someplace, like I'm in Olympia, Washington, but let's say I'm developing an app where all the data is in another location in the world. So I want to test to make sure that the location tools are working well. But if I click the button, it's going to find me in Olympia, Washington, but my data's in London, so I really want it to find me in London. So you can come here into the Dev Tools, go to More Tools and Sensors. And under Sensors, there's this geolocation section where you can override. It's got some out-of-the-box locations. You can add a custom location, and you can also test location unavailable, which is important to see if your app behaves correctly when the users don't allow location or it's not available to them. So it's worthwhile testing. So if we click London and I hit this button, let's zoom out a little bit. It locates me in London instead of here in Palm Springs, which is where it would locate me if that button wasn't hit. While we're talking about location and the locate button, I should also mention that these are only available if your app is working over HTTPS. So that's a common question that we get to, is people add the locate button to their app. They run it over HTTP and it doesn't work anymore. And that's because of browser restrictions. They say that geolocation API is only available over HTTPS, so you can't access it. You can on localhost, so it works on localhost because they consider that to be secure. It's your machine. Localhost and HTTPS. Otherwise, this button won't even show up. Okay. Are you ready for network requests?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so another way to debug your code if something's not working as you would expect it to do is to take a look at the network requests that are going out when you run your application. You're going to see it a lot of times, like it says here, it just helps with a lot of troubleshooting issues. So a big one that we see, printing, what request is being sent out, what parameters are getting sent within that request, what's actually getting sent back in your response. You can interrogate the results and so forth. So I think it's easier if we just take a look at a demo, and I will show you how this works. So I have just a really basic app, and this polygon layer just states. If this drop down, based upon which state, it should go in and actually zoom to that. Highlight it and just zoom to that specific location. So if I choose North Dakota here, it's not working, right? It's taking me to Alaska. And you can see here I have an error in the an error that pops up. So Failed to query for features. All right, well, we know something's going on with the query then, so let's take a look and see what this is. If I take a look at the network tab, I'm going to clear this out and rerun it so I don't get lost in all of this. You can actually filter these out too based upon, so if you want to see absolutely everything, or in this case, we're just looking for all of the XHR requests. Okay, so I'm going to go in here, try North Dakota. All right, not working. So what's going on here? So we can see based in this network requests, all these requests that are going through, I can go on down and just start, perusing, seeing what's going on. So I'm going to take the very first query that goes out. All right. So if I right click on this, I can open this. Let's query up. This is my JSON viewer. It's a little bit different from Kelly's, but the same thing. It's just an extension that I have on my machine. And you can see here that, all right, so this is the query that went out on that polygon layer. And these are all of the fields. But I've got this FID, shape area, shape length. All right, so I can see the query's being made. If I go back in here, I've got my response. I'm getting these features. It seems to be working okay. But if let's take a look at the actual code. I know that there's a section in here where I actually am calling this query features. So this private schools poly query features, once I get that, it's going to go and pass these results back in, and then for each of those features, I want to grab out the object ID of that object ID field and store it within this feature ID variable. Well, this is maybe where I need to take a look, because I remember looking back in my code or in the network request that there was no object ID. It was an FID. All right, so maybe that's the problem. So if I go in here, and I'm actually just going to change it directly within DevTools. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Save it, refresh it. All right, I'll start dancing while we wait. Okay. Go to North Dakota again. And you can see now I've got North Dakota, and it zooms the location that it's supposed to be going to. This was just private school enrollment. That's what actually we were looking at. All right. So just another way, usually when I'm doing any type of troubleshooting, and I also, when we get a lot of the support requests and bugs and so forth that come through, that's the very, very first thing that I'm going to take a look at. When you are debugging and looking at your code, that network traffic, the breakpoints in the network traffic, the top two. Okay. All right. Accessibility.
Okay, how many of you are building apps with accessibility in mind? So maybe you have to think about WCAG or 508 requirements, a couple handfuls, or just because it's the right thing to do. So we should all start thinking about accessibility. Building apps that are accessible means that more people can access your site in more locations. So I think it makes you have a better app in the end. Just my 2-second rant. There are a few tools that make it easier to ensure that your app is accessible and to test and see if you're meeting accessibility requirements. So we'll look at a few of those. The first one is this thing called audits. I actually started running it because it takes a little while. But there's an audit section in Chrome DevTools that has a bunch of different audits. It includes performance audits. If you're writing progressive web app, it'll analyze your app to see if you meet the requirements. There's a couple of different ones. There's also one called accessibility. So I can run it against my app, and it will tell me my score, how well I've met the requirements. It'll tell me things that I'm missing, audits that I passed, so I know what I'm doing right, and audits that didn't seem to apply to my particular application. they also give me this list of additional things I can check, because these automated tools that check for WCAG and 508 compliance, they can't test everything. They can't check that somebody can actually navigate through your site with the keyboard. They can't check various other things. So they give you a list of additional things that you need to do later. So I think it's good. Maybe even if you don't have to worry about WCAG right now, maybe go run this audit on your website and see if there are a few simple things that you can do to improve the experience. You might find it useful. Another thing is color contrast checker. So one of the accessibility requirements says that you have to have particular color contrast between the background and foreground color. So an example of bad color contrast is that Emmet cheat sheet that I showed you earlier. This sort of drives me nuts, this black background with that gray text. I can barely read that, right? So I know just from glancing at that there's no way that's going to meet the accessibility color contrast requirements. Let's see if we can verify that. So I'm going to right click and inspect. And in Chrome DevTools, they have this little color picker. You can click on it. And they added, just at the latest release, this contrast ratio in here. So I can check it. I can see it does not meet the requirements. We get that little red mark. It's like, doesn't meet AA and it doesn't meet AAA. So we know that we need to change the colors on this so that it does meet the color contrast requirements. And really, honestly, you can mostly check if your site meets the requirements just by looking at it. If it's hard to read, if you have yellow background and white text, or black background and gray text, it's just really hard, and people have a tough time seeing it. There's some extensions that I use. I use something called the Axe extension. It's actually the engine that powers that Chrome audit, that accessibility audit uses Axe capability behind the scenes to run that extension. They also have something called Axe Coconut, which is similar to Chrome Canary or Firefox Nightly. It's just the latest version. You're going to be on the cutting edge of what that team is working on. There's also a Chrome extension called Chrome Vox. It's a screen reader. So that's another experiment that's useful to run on your website, is you go to your website, enable Chrome Vox, and it's going to speak your website contents to you as you tab through it. Sometimes it's interesting to just close your eyes, turn Chrome Vox on, and try and navigate through your site just listening. So that's how somebody who's visually impaired is going to access your site. And you'll often find things that you can fix and make, just small tweaks that will make it a little bit easier for someone to access your content.
Okay. Okay, so we're going back into the DevTools. I'm going to talk a little bit about the DevTool workspaces that you can use. What you guys may have just noticed when I fixed that network issue, when I changed the object ID to the FID, I did that using the file system tab that you have. You can go in and actually set up a workspace directly within DevTools. So it's basically, it'd be seen similar, like it was like my IDE. All right, you can actually use DevTools as your IDE if you choose. There was a point a few years ago where there was quite a few people on our development team that actually did. I don't think they do anymore, but for like little things like what I just showed you, it's easy. You can do quick fixes. So basically, let me just go in here and I'll show you where that is. All right, so again, you just need to go in here. You're going to add a folder to your workspace. Okay, so this folder is, once you add that folder, you're going to be prompted by the DevTools. It's going to say, hey, do you give permission for this guy, for Chrome DevTools to modify and work within this workspace? You got to say yes. Once you have that, basically it's just you're working directly with these files. Okay, so this is good in instances where you do have access to the server, the development server that you're working with. And again, it really, you can use this. There are people that do use this. Does anybody in here use this as an IDE? Yeah? You like it? Yeah, exactly. It works, yeah, exactly. Like I just started, I don't use it all that much, but I can see where, it definitely does help, if you don't want to have to go in there and start opening a bunch of stuff up. You're just like, all right, we can go in here and just mess around with things and directly modify your files. So if you're on the network by default, when you guys go in here and you open up your DevTools, it's just going to bring in things from the network, right? So, you know, this would be this file I have, and it's accessing it directly. In this case, it is my own local web server. But, you know, if it was Esri.com, this is where we'd be pulling it from. The file system, though, in this case, this is where you're going to go in and say, hey, I want, like I mentioned before, you're going to specify that you need to have access to the workspace that you're actually modifying. So if we go in here, again, good if you want to build a site. We also have local overrides. You guys probably have done this before where maybe you've gone in and inspected some CSS perhaps and changed some styling and you get it and you like it and then you're like, I have to copy and paste everything, bring everything over, it's such a pain. Or you forget to copy and paste and then you refresh your page and you realize that everything that you just modified is now gone. Local overrides actually helps with that. So basically what it does is it allows you to target, like it says, these remote websites. So let's say, for example, I don't have access to Esri.com, but there are some pages on there that I thought were kind of cool and I wanted to take a look at, modify some things. What you can do is you can set up a local workspace on your machine that pretty much just copies out what you're looking at on the remote website, and you can modify those that in your local workspace. You can make these modifications and save those out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, and again, it says just good for reconstructing websites. So let's take a look at one of these. All right. So again, it's that same application that I showed you earlier. But let's say, for example, this was on a separate machine, or maybe, you know, this was, I am the developer for this, but it's out on production and, you know, your boss is like, I don't know, let's see, can we change this? The background, I don't want to look at Mount Vesuvius anymore. I don't know, let's try something else. So if you went in here, you can actually go in the settings. There is a, where are you? It's in here somewhere. Take my word on it, it's in here. Enable local override. There we go. So there's an enable local overrides. Click on that. Now what I want to do is in this overrides tab, I'm going to set this up. So I'm going to set up a folder that I want these overrides to get saved into. So for now, I'm just going to go and access. Didn't have this in here. All right. It's a lot. I'm going to create a folder. All right. Test overrides. All right, click off that. It's asking me, do you want to use this? Yes, I do. All right, and now I need to also tell it, hey, this is the file that I want to save out for my overrides. So that you can right click on that, save for overrides. Okay. And you'll see here, now I have this, within this, you'll see it within this test overrides, local overrides workspace that I created. All right, so I have a scene view that I'm going to go in and update, save out. And as just on the side note, I forgot the cool thing about local overrides. We did this demo yesterday, and when you do a repeat session, a lot of times you have to go back into your stuff and make sure that you need to revert it back to how it originally was after you did your demos. And I was like, oh, I opened this up and it's like, it's later, and I'm like, oh, I forgot I have to go back in and change this. And I was like, I don't have to change this. It was in my overrides. It's not, because I was thinking that I set it and I copied it directly to the main file and just overwrote the main file, but I didn't. So yeah, so here we have New York, all right, and just a little pop-up map view of the location I clicked on of Manhattan. All right, so just kind of cool, little nifty trick for those of you who may not be familiar with it. It's kind of a cool thing to look into. There's some documentation out there now that it's kind of helpful. Be able to get a little bit more on it. So we have this thing, custom formatting. That's another thing that you can do within DevTools. So let me go ahead and close that out. If you go into, again, the settings, make this a little bit bigger if I can. There is a There, enable custom formatters. So I have that clicked on already, so you're going to want to make sure that you have that checked on. There is a lot of good documentation out there about this. I'm not going to go into too much detail because this is how we did it. There's a bit of code that is involved with it. But I think it's good for someone who, if you're a developer, so basically if you're developing the application, this isn't good for if you're going to deploy it out to production. Basically what it allows you to do is it allows you to format how like objects and so forth look within maybe your console window when you're hovering over, when you're debugging. You don't get all that gobbledygook, you know, like like the 3 dots and just a lot of information that you may not need. So what I have done is Jan put this together a while ago, but it still works. If you guys want to take note, and it's in my repo as well. If you just click on that, you'll see there. He's got ArcGIS-JS-API-DevTools. This is the code that he used for this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you what it actually looks like in a moment here. But if you guys want to play around with it, there is a test app in here, and it will show you exactly how easy it is. It's pretty cool. So something to look at maybe later down the line. So again, I'm going to go in here and let me just put. Oh, we already have our debugger. So we're just going to go in here and I'm just going to run this again. Oh, that's the wrong one. Okay, so I have, I just set some breakpoints randomly in the code just to show you. So if we hover over one of a variable that I know is set, like the scene view, it looks a little different here, right? Than what you may have seen before when I was showing you some of the other demos. It's nicely formatted. Maybe here, let me open up the console and show you, makes it a little bit easier. All right, well, it worked earlier, so we'll come back to that. Try this once more. Yeah, maybe one more breakpoint, and we can see if we get any further. There, okay. So as you can see here, what it should have looked like initially, I just didn't get further enough in the code. All of the properties that show up, it's a little bit nicer on the eyes. Still a lot of properties, but you know, just initially looking at it, you can see that it's basically just showing you what is specific and what's pertinent to our stuff. And again, just a little bit nicer. So what I did here is I took this project that I created and I added it into what Jan had within his code. Probably have to do something very similar, but it is, again, just a nice little extra tool that if you're interested or just want to go ahead and play around with some of it, you can go in and access it from that repo. All right, so I want to make sure we get through the next few minutes here. All right. Okay. A couple things this may be for some of you that have been working with our stuff for a while. This is old hat. But for some of you that may be brand new, one thing that out of all of this that I do want to touch on is the module order. When you are making and creating JavaScript applications, is it in the wrong one? Yeah, I apologize. Okay, sorry about that.
See me send me
sending emails.
Yeah.
Sorry. When you're working in an application, JavaScript application, what you'll notice is you have these require statements. So Esri map, Esri layers, feature layer, whatever it is that you're working with. Then you'll also have it within the function call where you pass in the arguments or the variable names, okay, for these required statements. You need to make certain that you keep the names, the variable names, need to make it match up so that if you're working with a feature layer, you make sure that feature layer coincides with how you have it set up within your require statement. So for example, if I flip-flop map and feature layer, my code's not going to work. Okay, you'll get these weird errors like type, cannot find property, blah, blah, blah. And it's basically trying to say it's because, hey, you're trying to use map functionality off of feature layer class. So just something to keep in mind, especially for new people. It will trip you up. First thing, just if you ever get those can't find property of, that's generally what that error message is, what that's about. We got a few minutes here. So mixed content errors, you'll get a lot of the, if you're working with HTTP versus, and then you're accessing HTTPS, you'll see that within the console window. So just something, again, to keep in mind. You might get some CORS issues. We see that a lot when people, you'll see that especially in like the GeoNet forum. That, I actually wrote a doc because we were getting so many questions on that. If you go to the developer site, under our guide topics, just recently we updated the doc for, under the reference, there's a doc for CORS, and there's a doc for, oh my goodness, here we go, CORS and proxy pages. Okay, so those are the two newer ones. Just kind of goes in and discusses it a little bit more. And then, again, this is just commonplace. If you have issues narrowing down the problem, is it app specific? Is it API specific? Do you think it's a bug? Server-side issue, with printing, that's a big one. Is it something's not printing correctly? Okay, take it out of the application, and let's look at it directly within the services directory, passing the parameters in that you see within the network request, right? Are you getting the same issue there? Third-party resources. Is there anything else involved that you can narrow down? All right, do we want to?
Yeah, I'll just do it really
okay, go.
Really quickly. Okay. We don't have time to talk about it, but if you see these error messages in your console, if you ever open it in the last release or two or four, actually probably see these error messages. If you do, there's a blog post called Making Better Promises that talks about why they're there and what they mean. So check out that blog post. Fill out the survey. It helps us make a better session for next time. If you have a favorite tip or trick that we didn't cover, you can always add it as a note in the survey, and maybe we'll learn something new today too. And finally, I'll just put up the Dev Summit presentations again. This is where are the slides that we showed, the demos, some links to how to set up your code assist if you're working in JavaScript, and a few other things are all located here. And thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your time in Palm Springs.